As leaders, most of running a business is running a bunch of pet projects and seeing which one sticks. And that's what I find my role is. It's what is the experiment that we're going to bank on, understanding that 90% of them are going to fail, but you're just waiting for that 10% breakthrough. Leading with emotional intelligence. People are your biggest leverage in a business. And if you know how to work with people on the people level, then you're going to get the most out of them. I find that leading with emotional intelligence is culture from the heart.
Welcome to the Culture from the Heart podcast on the From the Heart Business Network. In a business world where employees and customers crave authenticity and trust, hosts Larry Levine and Darrell are on a mission to find and showcase heart-centered executives and the companies they lead. You are about to hear an inspiring conversation with a visionary leader that's bringing heart into the workplace, empowering employees, serving their clients, and uplifting communities, all to create true success. This is Culture from the Heart. The movement starts here. Let's begin.
Welcome to Culture from the Heart. I'm your co-host, Darrell, here today with Larry Levine, and we're joined by Hugo E. Gomez, founder and CEO of HispanicMarketing.com, a national marketing agency serving law firms and many other types of organizations. Hugo, welcome to Culture from the Heart. It's great to have you here.
Awesome, Darrell. Larry, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. We're going to have a great conversation this morning.
Yeah, for sure. And as we get started, the question we ask every leader on Culture from the Heart is simply this. What does Culture from the Heart mean to you?
So I knew about this format, so I cheated and I prepared. But it was actually really, I thought this was going to be a difficult question to answer. And it ended up being the easiest thing to answer, quite frankly. And it's leading with like emotional intelligence, because people are your biggest leverage, in a business. And if you know how to work with people on the people level, then you're going to get the most out of them. So it's not just a great practice for your business, but it's also a great practice in just being a fellow human being. So I find that leading with emotional intelligence is culture from the heart.
Oh, this is so good, Hugo, and I'm glad you brought this up. What's that look like in the day in the life of Hugo inside your company as far as leading with emotional intelligence? Describe that. What's that look like?
Yeah, I think it's particularly challenging in our organization because we're mostly remote. Like I'm at home right now. If not, I'm at my office just a couple blocks down the road, which is really nice. But the vast majority of our team are also working from home or rented office spaces. And so we have to do this all digitally. So like this format here is like my home. Like I'm totally comfortable in this format. This is where I'm at, 8, 10, 12 hours a day, talking to people, reading their body language, listening to their tone of voice, asking about what's going on in their lives. I'm not perfect and I don't have a playbook for it, but the day-to-day is really just being present with as many people as possible that are like big influencers in our company to find out if we're all on the same wavelength. Are we aligned right now?
Yeah. And, there's so many books and so many great things written about emotional intelligence, but I'm curious if from a practitioner's standpoint, from just like a super practical everyday standpoint, how would you define emotional intelligence for a leader?
Oh, that's a hard question to answer. It's for a business leader, I think it's different than just in life in general. It's aligned. It's making sure that everyone is aligned with the mission of the company, and that mission could be generate more revenue, generate more profit, or it could be we need to put 1,000 braces on kids this year to make them smile. Like whatever that mission is, the leadership has to define it and be very cognizant of where their leaders stand, their managers stand, because it trickles down to everyone else. To the extent that they're mission aligned with the business, but they're also emotionally capable that day, that week, that year, that month, that quarter of fulfilling that mission. Because all the lights on the dashboard have to be green. You have to have stable income. You have to have predictable days. You have to have good relationships at home. You have to remove as much dissonance from your life to be a high performer. And for a leader, I think you have to check in on those other externals aside from the day-to-day job. And I think that's true emotional intelligence. It's making sure that your team is not necessarily happy. That's not the goal, but that they're aligned. They're aligned with, they have some peace in their life, and that it's aligned with the mission of the company. Because there's a lot of people that aren't happy, and we can't change that, but they are very good performers, and they are at peace with certain dissonance in their life. And that's okay. We can't fix that. That's not our job. Our job is to make sure that their version of peace is aligned with the mission of our company.
And by the way, Hugo, I'm enjoying this conversation, and I want to zero in on a couple words you use, and I just like how you strung those together. You'd said emotionally capable. You got to unpack this just a little bit more. Emotionally capable, because I just like how the words come together.
Yeah, there's just certain thresholds for what people can withstand in a growing business. We're a small business. We're under 10 million, right? So there's natural challenges there. You have expenses that are like a $10 million company, but not yet the run rate of a $10 million company. So that creates a lot of demand on team members that need to, be true leaders. So emotionally capable. In short, what I think it means is, are you emotionally ready for the valleys that are definitive in a small business? And I find that a lot of people aren't. And I'll give you an example. So we actively do not hire folks from Ivy League schools. We don't even consider those resumes. I think those resumes are fantastic at Fortune 100 companies, big banks, etc. I don't think they fit into our culture. I don't think that by averages, there's a lot of studies on this, that folks that go to Ivy League schools are generally not emotionally capable of the valleys that are definitive in small businesses, because there's always a backup. There's always a backup for this cohort of clients or this cohort of employees. Whereas when I hear a story from a potential candidate and they've gone through some adversity in their life, something that I really relate to, I've gone through a tremendous amount of adversity, which we don't even need to get into here. This is not what it's about. But I find that adversity is a very good thing, especially overcome adversity. Have you seen the worst happen, and have you come out on the other side? If the answer is yes, then we really need to talk. And I think there's a lot of emotional maturity in being able to say that was a past. I can compartmentalize it. I know the growth that I've had from it. And I know all the upside I got from that past and how I'm going to apply it to this new future. I think that takes a lot of emotional resilience. And I think a lot of emotional capability comes from your history of, frankly, how privileged or not you were. And I find that is a leading indicator of who we're going to hire. So what is your story? And I bank on that all day. I bank on that story more than any other factor that I could possibly read on the resume.
Well, we're stepping away for just a moment, but coming up, we'll continue this great conversation with Hugo E. Gomez. Stay tuned. Let's be honest, finding the right people and building the right culture, that's the holy grail for every leader.
That's why we recommend Titus Talent, because they don't just fill seats. They help you build teams that thrive.
With their partnership plans, you get more than just hiring help. You get a committed team by your side that helps you attract top performers and retain them.
They bring strategy, data, and a human touch to talent optimization. No guesswork, just results.
So if you're ready to invest in your people and create a culture where everyone wins, head over to culturefromtheheart.com/talent to learn more.
That's culturefromtheheart.com/talent. Your culture is your competitive advantage. Design it with Titus Talent.
Welcome back. Thank you for supporting our sponsors. We're having a great conversation with Hugo E. Gomez, founder and CEO of HispanicMarketing.com. Hugo, before the break, we were talking about the importance of small business to consider this emotional capability, ability to handle the valleys of small business. And I know so many leaders are listening in that work for smaller businesses, and we get exactly what you're talking about with the valleys. Talk more about what that looks like inside your organization, because you can tell that this is something you've had a lot of experience with and thought a lot about.
Yeah. So, as leaders, most of running a business is running a bunch of pet projects and seeing which one sticks. And that's what I find my role is. It's what is the experiment that we're going to bank on, understanding that 90% of them are going to fail, but you're just waiting for that 10% breakthrough. And that's a 10% breakthrough that you just double, triple, quadruple down on. I really believe that that's fundamentally the role of a founder, of a CEO. It's to try as many things as possible and double down on the ones that are breakthroughs. The thing is that 90% that all of us understand as a default is a 90% that a lot of employees struggle with in various degrees. Some people get excited by failure. They want to, prove themselves outside of that failure. We love that kind of profile. Other folks just crumble on the other side, right? They just crumble at failure. But we tend to filter employees like that outside of the consideration because we ask candidly, tell me about your last 5 projects that failed. And we can sort of tell by how they respond to that question whether or not they're going to truly understand, how critical failure is in a growing business. Like, we always talk about like what's great, what's working. I'm not excited about that. I think those are great things to celebrate. I'm more focused on what are the things that aren't working that have all this potential, and do I have other team members aligned with me on that vision? So, and every person in my team has some version of projects that are in consideration that are likely to fail, but they're looking for that breakthrough. So I think the valleys are just understanding that sometimes a valley is perpetual in certain instances in terms of experimentation. But then there's also valleys of like, hey, we have a huge client and they're up for renewal, and now they want us to reduce our fee by 25%. How do we get around this? Right. And so those are more like episodic, they happen once a quarter. We just try to filter it out from the consideration, the candidates in consideration, to understand, do they have the stamina? Do they have the appetite to go through independently on their own without managerial, hand holding? Do they have the ability to do this on their own? That's so important to our culture, that autonomy of being able to make a decision and fail. Like, that's so important. And I don't think it's spoken of enough in small businesses.
Oh, this is good stuff. You got to walk us through, because I could tell you're deeply attached to this. So where'd you learn all of this from, Hugo? I'm just curious.
I didn't go to business school. I went to journalism school. I was a jazz piano minor. It's just, like I mentioned earlier, sometimes life throws you curveballs and you just have to figure things out. So, had a huge curveball some 15 years ago, decided to change my career out of journalism, and said, I'm going to get a big boy job and find out, what these other ventures look like. I was hired for $10 an hour, got a front seat with the CEO at a credit repair company. CEO ended up being my mentor to this day. And he just let me watch and witness and document and participate. I still don't know why he hired me. But I think those years were formative in seeing, how does a CEO at the $15 million ARR level operate? And although we manage things completely differently, I think the fundamentals are sound. It's managing cash flow, monitoring CAC, making sure that your team is happy, taking them to happy hours, like things of that nature. Like those fundamentals I always kept with me. But everything that we're talking about here, I feel like can only be learned from experience. You know, I've talked to, folks that wanted to be hired with our C-suite team, MBAs, things of that nature. And they just don't have it. They don't have the experience. You just need lived experience. And there's nothing better than, having lived it. So I wish I could cite a book or anything like that. I have too many books that I've read that provide some guidance, but I just feel like overwhelmingly it's getting punched in the face is when you learn the most.
Hey, Hugo, if we could pop in on one of your team meetings and we asked people on your team to describe the culture at your organization, what would you hope that they would say?
Well, they all know that this is a performance-based culture, right? But at the same time, we don't forget that we're people and we actually do like being around one another. So even in this environment where it's very performance-based, where yes, we've had to lose people that we like due to performance, we all know that that's kind of like the North Star in our business. It's the scorecard. Not to get all EOS-y on you guys, but like we do adopt some versions of EOS. And I think the scorecards are really important. Like no meeting should happen unless there's a scorecard. So I would like to think that my team thinks that we're a data-oriented, performance-based team that doesn't forget that we all really like to be around one another. Like the highlights of my year, like I mentioned, we're a virtual team. The highlights of my year as a founder is when I can gather my managers or my team in the same room for a trip, an outing, a dinner, a concert, whatever. That to me is the highlight and the best representation of who we are, because we've earned, our way to, some R&R, but at the same time, we're actually very much looking forward to hanging out on a personal level. Like all my managers, we all know each other's spouses. We all know each other's stories. And it's because we're just super aligned to the mission of the company. And we're super aligned to making sure that we're keeping each other accountable. And my managers do a great job great job keeping me accountable. I'm not a great, perfect leader by any stretch. I have some shortcomings for sure, but I'm so lucky to have some managers that do hold me accountable to that.
Well, you're listening to Culture from the Heart. We'll be back after a brief break to hear from our sponsors.
If you were buying a company, you wouldn't just glance at the website and say, looks good, let's buy it. You'd do your due diligence. You'd review the books, check the leadership, dig into performance history.
Exactly. You never spend millions on a company without knowing what you're getting. Yet, most CEOs hire salespeople with nothing more than a resume and a gut feeling.
That's why we recommend Sales Index Unlimited Candidate Assessments. It's like due diligence for your sales hires. Each sales candidate is evaluated across 21 core sales competencies, because a crucial role like sales requires more than a personality profile. Sales Index compares candidates against a database of 2.5 million salespeople. You'll know exactly who has the drive, the grit, and the skills to perform before you bring them on board.
Because in sales, a bad hire doesn't just cost salary. It costs momentum, margin, and morale.
For just $299 a month, you can protect your growth engine and make every sales hire a smart investment.
Do your due diligence before your next hire.
Go to unlimited.salesindex.ai. That's unlimited.salesindex.ai and hire with confidence.
All right, let's get right back into it with our friend Hugo. Hugo, one thing about your team that I know a lot of leaders listening to this show are in the situation where we've got virtual teams now, and your team is 100% virtual. And this presents unique challenges when it comes to building and sustaining culture. What have you done, and what advice would you give to other leaders with virtual teams when it comes to building and sustaining culture?
Yeah, so I think before we get into like trust and accountability systems, you have to have an intention to meet. Like at minimum once a year. In a virtual environment, you might have a situation where you have 50 employees scattered across the Americas, maybe some in South Africa, a couple in Europe. That's going to be really difficult when you don't create clusters. I like creating clusters and having clusters of employees, for instance, in Argentina and Mexico and the United States. It makes it a lot easier to gather people. So I think even in a virtual environment, you have to have a goal to gather as many people as possible at least once a year. If not, create a budget for these clusters to go out for dinner, to go out for drinks, go dancing, whatever that is, that's part of your culture, once a quarter. You do have to schedule, these offsites, if you will. And virtual does not work unless you have that in mind. So I think that is fundamental to having a thriving virtual team, because they want to meet their coworkers, some of which who are their friends. They want to, they just want that FaceTime outside of work. So that's super critical. Can't recommend that enough. Beyond that, you have to have a high level amount of trust with all of your employees at every level of the company. And you have to have accountability systems. We call it like a red, green, yellow light system. Everyone's work can be measured. And if you can't measure it, you can't manage to it, right? So let's talk about recruiting, for instance. Recruiting hinges on how much you're spending on job posts, how many interviews you're getting, how many hires you're getting, and the related metrics and calculations in that funnel. Same with social media. How many engagements are you getting? How much are you spending on boosted posts? Paid ads managers, website management, turnaround time. Everyone has a metric. And you need accountability systems that measure these things objectively. Otherwise, you're just blindly trusting that your team's going to get the job done, and it doesn't work at scale. You need to hop into a meeting. Every meeting needs a scorecard. Every meeting needs some data for the most part. And again, that works in our culture. We're a performance-based culture that leads with emotional empathy, that leads with emotional intelligence. But at the same time, people have to understand that this relationship only exists on accountability systems. So without getting too much into the details, you need IT involved. You need, dashboard people involved. You need, at this point, you can vibe code most of this, which is amazing. We've been doing a lot of experimenting with that. But in virtual, for us, what I've found is the recipe: you got to gather people and make that promise. And you have to have really good accountability systems to enable that trust where you can't see that person next to you at the desk.
It's what's interesting about this. There's so much gold in there. Is I just think of the opposite of this is the lack of trust and all that, and sometimes the freedom that comes in this virtual environment. I'm just curious, how do you sense? I'll call it the spidey sense, Hugo, as the founder and the CEO. How do you view, or how do you look at when things aren't going down that right road in this virtual environment? Walk us through what goes through your mind. What are the triggers that says to Hugo, I don't know, something's just not right now?
Yeah, there's a lot of sort of leading indicators that something's not working. Most of them can be measured, though. It's usually the work will reflect where that person is emotionally. They may be burned out. They might be thinking that there's, greener grass. There's so many ways to measure that. But I find that initially it shows up in the work. Then it shows up in their presence, right? Mm-hmm. Are they showing up to meetings on time? Then it shows up in how they show up to meetings. Are they prepared? Do they have interest? We have certain rules in our business where the camera's always on, because you never know when you're going to meet a client. I might pull you into a sales call at any moment's notice. And so you have to look prepared at any moment, working hours. There's also a respect to our ground rules of like, you must respond to any message from a team member during business hours within 30 minutes. It's like a rule. And so if for whatever reason you're delayed on responding to people within our sandbox of rules, if you're not showing up prepared, if you're showing up late, if your metrics are lagging, those are indicators that we need to work on something. So before going to conclusions and saying, hey, this isn't a fit, we just, again, culture from the heart. We ask questions. What's going on? Like, there's no need to BS any one of us in our company. You could level with us right now. What's going on? Dog died, partner's sick, getting evicted for unjust reasons. We've heard that one before. It's kind of crazy. We've heard all the stories, but it's important to give people a platform to tell their story and to communicate to us why things aren't going the right way, and then we either fix it or we find an alternate path for them down the road. But I find that those are the most obvious ones that we see as like repeated patterns when things aren't going the right way.
So good. Well, Hugo, as we wrap this up, if you could say one thing as we end to encourage leaders, especially leaders of virtual teams, what would you say?
You could still have a great culture, even if your employees aren't connected every day. You just have to work harder on it, ironically, than those that have in-person office teams.
I love it. Well, Hugo, thank you so much for sharing your heart, your story, and your insights with us today. This has been amazing.
Thanks, guys.
Oh, it's our pleasure.
What a powerful conversation, Larry. And I want to go back to the beginning, this concept of emotional intelligence that Hugo brought up at the very beginning. It's so important to be aware and be tuned into what's going on in the emotional heartbeat of your company, especially for our friends who are smaller businesses who are going to have some, different types of levels of intensity, if you will, in the valleys that come along the way.
I just think of two words: pay attention. As a leader, we must be paying attention, especially in a virtual world, in a totally different fashion than if we were face to face.
So good. Well, thanks for joining us this week. We believe that culture is the heartbeat of every organization. And as Hugo has reminded us, it is about emotional intelligence. So thank you for joining us today on Culture from the Heart. Until next time, lead with your heart and watch your culture thrive.
Thank you for joining us on this journey to discover heart-centered leaders shaping extraordinary company cultures. To access a leader guide with notes from this week's episode, simply click the link in the show notes or visit us at www.culturefromtheheart.com. Do you know a CEO who's built a culture from the heart? We'd love to hear their story. Head over to www.culturefromtheheart.com and click the Nominate Your CEO button. Until next time, remember, great cultures start with the heart.